If you'll take your Bibles and turn to the book of Job, chapter 34 and verse 21. Not only does he have us in his hands, we're in his eye as well. Job 34:21 says, "For his eyes are on the ways of man, and he sees all his steps."
Yes, well, thank you, Mrs. Goss, for that song with the kids. Very appropriate song. It just fits into my message this morning very, very well. I thought about this question this week. You know, how does God look at the world? Do you ever think about that? How does God look at this world? And as I thought about all that's going on right now, the question became real. You know, how does God look at the things that are happening in the world right now? I mean, you just look at what's happening in the last 2 weeks. I appreciated what Arden said about what's going on. But just in the last 2 weeks, we've had hurricanes and tornadoes, Hurricane Ida, and there's a couple of other ones that are forming out in the Atlantic right now. 61 people died. Actually, over 50 of those people died when it hit New York. It wasn't even from the hurricane when it came on shore in Louisiana. And then you got fires and floods, unprecedented fires and floods worldwide. Russia this year has the worst fire season. I mean, you think Canada and the Northwest United States is bad, but Russia has had the worst fire season they've ever had in the history of their country. Spain, Turkey. I mean, you've seen what's gone on in the news. It's incredible. And flooding like we've never seen before. Political turmoil. You know, nobody seems like they want to get along anymore. I don't know, it just seems like politics have changed. You got the earthquake in Haiti. You know, in the last 2 weeks, 2,200 people dead so far. Afghanistan. I don't know if you saw the pictures that I saw on the news. You know, people hanging on to transport planes, C-130s, because they're trying to leave their country. And I thought, you know, it's so what a blessing to live in Canada. But people doing stuff like that to try to get out of their country. Yeah, Delta variant, running rampant around the world. Vaccine passports, upsetting a lot of people. Vaccine mandates happening so fast. I never thought it would happen as fast as it is, but in fact, a news poll this week, I'm getting a little bit of an echo on that. I don't know if you are too. The majority of companies plan to have COVID-19 vaccine mandates in place by October 31st. Just amazing. Of course, that may fail at the Supreme Court. We don't know what it's going to look like as we get farther into the future. But it just looks like the Revelation 13 buy and sell, cancel culture mindset is being developed in people. And, where is it leading to us? It seems like the signs of Christ's return are just mounting around the world. They're thickening around the world. And as I thought about the things that are happening in the world, I wonder how God sees this pitiful world. We only see a corner of it, or what we see through our computer screens. But God sees it all. He sees it all at a glance. God doesn't have spots before his eyes like I do. I don't know if most of you know, but I got this problem with my eyes. It's called the vitreous fluid in my eyes is actually shrinking, and it's causing the retinas at the back of my eyes to separate. And so I've got these spots before my eyes, and they're getting worse. And I can still see you, but I can see you behind my spots, And apparently it's fairly common for people that are over 50 years old, so I'm I'm right in there with the other people that are experiencing it. But God does not have spots before his eyes. His vision is clear, and everything is open before him. He sees the past, he sees the present, and he sees the future all at the same time. According to Revelation 5:6, Jesus has 7 eyes. You ever wonder about that verse in Revelation? Why does he have 7 eyes? Well, it simply means that he has perfect vision. Nothing escapes his notice. He sees things that we do not see. Our scripture reading that Arden read for us. For his eyes are on the ways of man, and he sees all his steps. Here's another one. Hebrews 4:13, and there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read that, it actually gives me a certain level of comfort. It makes me feel good. God sees me. God knows me. He knows my every step. And yet I think that makes some people feel a little bit uncomfortable. They don't like the idea that someone is watching them all the time. I've talked about my little device that I have in my kitchen called a Google Home. You ever heard of those Alexas and Siris and Google Homes? Some people, they won't even get one of those in their home because, Google's listening to every word that they say. But people don't like the idea of somebody watching them all the time. And I think some people are drifting from seeing the world through God's eyes and are seeing God through the world's eyes. And they're being transformed by it, and we don't want to be transformed by it. That's why Paul warned us in Romans 12:2. He says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Having a renewed mind helps us to see the world through God's eyes. But back to the question, how does God see? What does God see? When God looks down from his lofty throne in heaven, what does he see in this world? Well, how about Psalms 53:2-3? God looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. Every one of them has turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is none who does good, no, not one. How about Genesis 6:5? Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man, looking down from heaven upon this earth, he saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be just before the coming of the Son of Man. How about Isaiah 53:6? All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. Now, I don't presume to know all that God sees, but in his word, in the Bible, he does give us some insight. When God looks down at this world, it must not be a very pretty sight. He sees mankind in a serious condition, in distress, a world on a path of destruction. His pure and holy eyes see a world of wickedness, and yet, even though he sees all the troubles going on in this world, he still feels pity for us. He has compassion on the world, and he has not left us to perish. He sees sinful people who need to be reconciled with him through Jesus Christ. And he sees a whole world that needs to be evangelized. In fact, I would say that until we see the world the way God sees it, Jesus will not return. Jesus said, do not say there are still 4 months and then comes a harvest. Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white and ready for harvest. John 4:35. On one occasion, on another occasion, Jesus said, the field is the world. Matthew 13:38. That means that God sees the world as an evangelistic field of labor. That means that Africa, Asia, Australia, North America, South America, Europe, the islands of the sea are all seen by God as a great harvest field that needs to be gathered in. And then he says in Matthew 9:37, the harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. You see, God needs you. God sees a great need in the world. And so, again, that brings me to the question, the all-important question, how does God look at the world? Well, if God sees a world in trouble, in need of rescuing, we should as well. There's a lot of people today worried about being under a mandate. Well, guess what? We have been under a mandate from the day that we've been baptized. We have a special mandate to go and gather in the harvest and save the lost. Ellen White said as much in a manuscript letter dated 1901. She says, the inhabitants of the heavenly universe are looking with intense interest upon God's enterprises in different parts of the world. God says, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Take this word as a message from heaven to which you are to pay profound attention, that you may understand, there it is, the heavenly mandate, and be prepared to answer, here I am, send me. So there it is. Our heavenly mandate is to accept God's call to go to work in the world and labor for God. So when we begin to see the world through God's eyes, we will embrace God's evangelistic mandate. I fear, though, that some people are becoming more worried about the mandates of the world than the mandate of heaven. And I think at this time in history of the world, the only remedy for us is to see through the eyes of God. And that is a world in need of Jesus and his present truth. That is what God sees, and that's what he wants us to see as well. Now, another verse that I'd like us to consider when thinking about the idea of seeing the way God sees, or seeing with God's eyes, is in Luke 11. It says in verse 34, the lamp of the body is the eye. Therefore, when your eye is good, your whole body also is full of light. But when your eye is bad, your body also is full of darkness. Therefore, take heed that the light which is in you is not darkness. Would somebody like to come up here and explain that for us? There's not a lot of commentary notes on this verse. The best way that I could understand this verse is to think about it in the context of the desires of the heart. Now, it's no secret that the human heart is selfish. Our desires are usually focused on ourselves. I found this wonderful little statement in the Life Application Commentary. Concerning this verse, it said, the lamp is Christ. The eye represents spiritual understanding and insight. Evil desires make the eye less sensitive and blot out the light of Christ's presence. If you have a hard time seeing God at work in the world and in your life, check your vision. Are any sinful desires blinding you to Christ? So here's the thing. When we desire the things God desires, we are seeing with God's eyes, and your eye is good. When we desire things contrary to God's will, then your eye is bad. So ask yourself again, what is your eye drawn to that may be causing you to have wrong desires and not seeing things the way God sees things? What are you watching? What are you reading? Which websites appear the most frequently on your history tab? What are the self-serving desires, the interests, the ambitions that may be blocking you from seeing the world through God's eyes? I think the best way to restore that vision is by directing our desires to serving God and not serving self. If God sees a world perishing in darkness, is it the desire of your heart to do whatever you can to save this dying world? My message to you this morning is short and simple. And the question is, how can we look at the world through the eyes of God? So usually I have a 3-point sermon, so here they are. Number 1, study the life of Christ. Seeing through the eyes of Jesus is seeing through the eyes of God. Study his life, study his teachings, and you will see as Jesus sees. Second, I would say to you is pray daily. In your daily prayers, ask God to help you to start seeing people as he sees them, and he will give you spiritual insight. And finally, I would say to you, look for every opportunity to share Jesus and his truth with as many others as you can. Regardless of all the distractions around us, we must see the world as God does. That is why we are joining together with Ron Nelson. I know he's probably been doing some advertising the last couple of weeks, and we're going to have some evangelistic meetings here in the church starting in October. That's why we stock our library full of books. You know, those books are for you. Those books are for you. We spend money on lots of books, so you have literature to go out and hand out to people. So go into the library after the sermon today and take some books and share them with others. And that's why I belong to a church whose central message and focus is the 3 angels' message. Because when we see things the way God does, we cannot not do the work that Jesus is calling us to do in the world. And when we do, God will bless us, and God will bless you, and God will be with you to the very end. And I read a post this week in Hike Alberta. Hike Alberta is one of those Facebook pages where you post all your hiking pictures, and Sheila and I are on it all the time because we like hiking. So it's one of the pages that we visit a lot. But I read a story in there that shocked me. Apparently last week, I think it was last week, a guy and his 7-year-old child were hiking up a mountain, and apparently the child was unable to make it to the summit. I mean, you can't expect too much from a 7-year-old. And so the father just left the child alone so he could continue on to summit the mountain. Well, while he was gone, some other hikers happened along and heard this child crying. And when they looked around, they found this 7-year-old child alone, crying, scared, hiding under a crag of rocks. And so they waited for half an hour for the father to return. And after a serious talk with Daddy, and Daddy promising that he will never do it again, they let the father and the daughter continue on their journey. Now, when I thought of that story, I thought, God would never leave us like that. I would never leave my child like that, not a 7-year-old. I mean, I like summiting mountains, but it's not that important. God will never do that to you. He will never, ever leave you, just like Jackie said in her video today. Your Father will stay with you right to the end of your journey. Through all kinds of danger, he sees your predicament. He knows what you're up against, and he sees it all. For as our scripture reading says, for his eyes are on the ways of man, and he sees all his steps. Right now, you may be going through a very difficult time. In your own eyes, it may look as if you have failed. It may look as if you don't have what it takes. But for those of us who know the Lord, he is always watching, and he cares over us. And he will see you through till you reach your final destination. If you don't know him today, you can look to him right now. He loves you, he sees you, and he will be with you to the very end because he is your friend. Would you like to trust him today? Our closing song today will be a little bit different. We're not going to sing it together. My daughter is going to come to the piano, and she's going to do a special music for us for our closing song, and then we'll have a closing prayer after that. I only get my daughter and my son for 2 more weeks, and then they're off back to school again. So, Julia, come and sing for us.